Major General Fitz John Porter struggles with the wooded terrain east of Warrenton and requires nearly 2 hours to arrange his 10,000 troops for the assault on Jackson's left wing at the unfinished railroad. Colonels Henry A. Weeks and Charles W. Roberts place their respective 3rd and 1st Brigades of Butterfield's 1st Division on the left and in the center of Porter's formation. Hatch's 1st Division of McDowell's 3rd Corps assumes responsibility for Porter's right. 2 brigades of regular U.S. Army troops from Brigadier General George Sykes' 2nd Division file into a reserve line poised to exploit any local advantage earned by the initial attackers. On his own initiative after Reynolds' departure, Colonel Gouverneur K. Warren shifts his tiny 3rd Brigade of 2 New York regiments in Sykes' division to a position south of the Turnpike. Warren joins Battery D, 5th U.S. Artillery under young 1st Lieutenant Charles E. Hazlitt, who has emplaced his 6 guns on a prominent knoll overlooking Groveton. Only a handful of additional Union artillery can find locations from which to strengthen the infantry attack. Porter's foot soldiers will have to carry the burden virtually alone. The Confederates targeted by Porter's assault belonged to Jackson's division, now led by Brigadier General William E. Stark, which forms in parallel lines concealed by the unfinished railroad in the woods beyond. Louisiana planner Leroy A. Stafford commands Stark's old 2nd Louisiana Brigade, who defend near the dump. To Stafford's right, Bradley Johnson's Virginians occupy a pronounced portion of the railroad bed known as the Deep Cut. Bronner Farm veterans from A.G. Tolliver's command and the Stonewall Brigade crouch in the forest on Johnson's right. Captain John B. Brockenborough's Baltimore, Maryland artillery provides direct support to the Confederate battle line, which fronts an open field varying in depth from 300 to 600 yards, and the last 150 yards of which pitches sharply uphill. At 2:30 p.m., green-jacketed skirmishers of Colonel Hiram Berdan's 1st U.S. Sharpshooters and Colonel Henry A. V. Post's 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters scale the fence along the Groveton-Sully Road and enter the pastures of Dogan's Ridge, a piece of land owned by the widow named Lucinda Dogan, whose substantial holdings surround the village of Groveton. Joined on the skirmish line by the 25th New York and 3rd U.S. Infantry, the marksmen of the 1st and 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters find slight shelter in a dry stream bed, now called Schoolhouse Branch, and skirmish with Stark's Confederates for nearly 30 minutes. Then, at the scheduled time of 3 p.m., Porter's lead ranks emerge from the woods and begin their long trek across the killing fields of the Dogan farm. Hatch's men on the Union right face the shortest exposure in the open ground. The soldiers of the 24th and 30th New York topple the fence paralleling the road and hasten for the Confederate positions under intense fire from cannon and muskets. The Federals managed to reach the edge of the railroad bed separated from the gray-clad opponents by the width of the embankment. Several particularly brave Union officers enter the fight on horseback, making themselves conspicuous targets and attracting grudging admiration from nearby Confederates. After a momentary debate, the Southerners decide that this Yankee gallantry does not warrant a reprieve from the hazards of war, and rebel rifles tumble the courageous New Yorkers from their saddles. The surviving Federals clutch the ground below the embankment and form a rough flame within whispering distance of the Louisianians of Stafford's brigade. To Hatch's left, Roberts and Weeks appear on the naked track opposite the waiting Virginians of Bradley Johnson's brigade. These Unionists have to traverse nearly a quarter mile of shelterless terrain before gaining the unfinished railroad, and they pay dearly for the achievement. As they reach Johnson's position, the Confederates level their rifles and unleash a withering volley. The first line of the attacking column looked as they had been struck by a blast from a tempest and had been blown away, marveled one Southerner. The smoke, dust, and noise combines to sow confusion in the Union ranks. The 1st Michigan and Roberts Brigade makes it to within 50 yards of the embankment before it is halted by inflating fire and goes to ground. The 13th New York and 18th Massachusetts advance to within yards of the Deep Cut, take cover behind bushes and rocks, and continue their fire. To Roberts' left, the 17th New York Weeks Brigade emerges from the woods and moves forward alone. Without stopping at the Schoolhouse Branch, the men of the 17th reach the base of the slope leading up to the unfinished railroad and rush up the hill with a mad yell. They reach the crest in front of Johnson's brigade 50 yards from the excavation. A deadly blast of artillery and musket fire halts their line. The exposed 48th Virginia promptly turns and heads for the rear in a rout. Along a quarter-mile front, The fighting rages unabated at extremely close ranges. Convinced that his 2 remaining regiments cannot hold, Johnson orders his 2 reserve units, the 1st Virginia Irish Battalion and the 21st Virginia, to leave the woods and come up in support. The 2 fresh units move into the open field and are promptly shredded by mass volleys of musket fire. Fewer than 300 men make it across the field, tumbling into the deep cut alongside the 42nd Virginia. The retreat of the 48th Virginia opens a dangerous gap between Johnson's right and Taliaferro's left. In rushes the Stonewall Brigade led by its intrepid commander, Colonel William S.H. Baylor. The Ragged Valley veterans restore the Confederate battlefront at a heavy cost, including Colonel Baylor, who dies with the flag of the 33rd Virginia wrapped around his body. As is the case on Hatch's sector, the Federals near the deep cut retain their advanced positions, exchanging a ceasefire with the well-sheltered opponents behind the railroad excavation just a few yards away. General Jackson clearly needs help. Stonewall's 3 divisions have marched more than 50 miles in 34 hours, destroyed the Union supply base, fought delaying actions at Battle of Manassas, engaged Pope's army at the Bronner Farm, and fought along Stony Ridge for 2 days. His bloody and battered brigades have thus far carried the campaign virtually alone, and the time has come for Longstreet to contribute. Jackson dispatches a future memoirist, Henry Kidd Douglas, to ask Old Pete for assistance. Longstreet also recognizes that the moment has arrived for his divisions to uncoil, but he reasons that sending infantry to Jackson will consume too much time. Instead, he orders additional artillery batteries to drop tail in support of S.D. Lee's battalion at the Bronner Farm. Captain William Chapman's Dixie Virginia artillery moves up to a low knoll just north of the Warrenton Turnpike. Jackson's 4 guns add their fire to that of S.D. Lee. These artillerists enjoy an uninstructed view of the pasture land across which any Union reinforcements must move to reach their comrades huddled along the embankment. This same fire will inflict appalling casualties on any Northerners who attempt to retreat from their toeholds to the safety of the Groveton Woods. Within 20 minutes of the commencement of Porter's attack, the ground between the Groveton-Sully Road and the unfinished railroad explodes from the effects of Stephen Lee's cannonade. When fresh Union troops attempt to run this gauntlet, iron missiles from Confederate guns cut them to pieces. Major General Porter opts not to commit Sykes to the relief of Roberts and Weeks, but he does allow additional units from Hatch's division to attempt to rescue the 2 regiments clinging to the unfinished railroad on the Union right. As these Federals race across the fields absorbing a brutal enfilading artillery fire, they encounter the cataclysmic presence of fresh Confederate infantry released by Lawson's division to support Stafford's hard-pressed left flank. By this time, Porter has surrendered the initiative. He chooses not to reinforce failure any longer and essentially abandons to their fate the 4 Union brigades who had clawed their way to the front. Had he known, however, how severely his assaults have stressed Jackson's line, he might have continued the offensive. By 3:45, Stafford's and Johnson's brigades have completely expended their ammunition. Without any ammo, men all across the line hold empty muskets and rifles. The rebels know that it is only a matter of minutes before the Federals realize the predicament and launch an attack into the deep cut. At this moment, Private Michael O'Keefe of the 1st Louisiana Infantry Regiment in Stafford's 2nd Louisiana Brigade looks to his comrades and shouts, "Boys, give them the rocks." With no alternatives, the Louisianans and some of the Virginians from Johnson's brigade resort to picking up rocks and stones from the excavation of the deep cut and begin hurling them over the other side. Union troops are stunned, some quite literally as they are knocked senseless by the big stones, and some even begin to throw rocks back at the Confederates in the deep cut. The desperate rock fight at the deep cut lasts for about 10 minutes before the Louisianans and Virginians are finally resupplied with ammunition. The rest of Stonewall Jackson's left wing has nearly reached its capacity to sustain combat, but the appearance of Charles Field's brigade of Virginians from A.P. Hill's Light Division ultimately tips the balance in favor of the Confederates. At last, physical strength and moral endurance alike gave way before the terrible effect of our fire, boasted a rebel officer, and the whole Union force fled in disorderly rout to the rear. Porter's advanced brigades lose heavily during the retreat from the unfinished railroad. Some of Stark's men, caught up in the passion of victory, begin a spontaneous pursuit that meets a decided repulse from Union reserves posted along the Groveton-Sully Road. The Confederates return to their original positions and witness an unspeakable scene of horror. The Yankees in front of the railroad were lying in heaps, were called a Louisianan. Some with their brains oozing out, some with their face shot off, others with their bowels protruding, others with shattered limbs. The survivors of Porter's attack finds welcome refuge in the Groveton Woods east of the Groveton-Sully Road. Sigel's 1st Corps, Milroy's Independent Brigade, and Federal Cavalry units support Sykes and the reserve regiments of Hatch's division to stem the tide of refugees. Jackson's exhaustion renders him unable to organize a rapid pursuit, allowing Porter to stabilize the tactical situation north of the Turnpike, but to Irving McDowell the situation appears grim. Fearing for the safety of Porter's 5th Corps, McDowell orders Reynolds to cross the Turnpike from Chinn Ridge. Not only is such a precaution totally unnecessary, but Reynolds' departure leaves only 2,200 men south of the highway, McLean's and Warren's brigades, to oppose more than 10 times that many Confederates. McDowell's decision will be the most serious tactical error of the day because those Confederates are about to erupt onto the tactical stage at Second Manassas with a dramatic effect. Generals Lee and Longstreet both conclude that the moment has indisputably arrived to commence a massive Confederate offensive that Lee had hoped to begin the previous day. Its goal, ironically, will be Henry House Hill, the key terrain at the Battle of First Manassas 13 months earlier. Confederate control of this lofty plateau will confine the Federals to the north side of the Warrenton Turnpike and deny them the retreat routes across Bull Run. The lure of complete victory thus animates Longstreet's 5 divisions, whose enemy will be the descending sun as well as the Northern Army. Longstreet's right wing extends nearly a mile and a half from the Bronner Farm on its left to the Manassas Gap Railroad on its right. The distance to Henry House Hill varies from 1.5 to 2 miles, and the intervening landscape contains numerous small streams, some heavy woods, and intermediate ridges. Old Pete recognizes that his troops will find it impossible to maintain an unbroken attack formation, so success would depend on speed, good judgment, and hard fighting by his individual subordinate commanders. John Bell Hood's division, led by the Texas Brigade and supported by Nathan G. Shanks' Evans Brigade of South Carolinians, will begin the assault from the left of Longstreet's line, nearest the Turnpike. Kemper's division will move on Hood's right with the brigades of D.R. Jones' division in support of Kemper's right. The rest of Longstreet's wing will provide a raider reserve. At 4 p.m., Longstreet unleashes his much anticipated sledgehammer attack. At that exact moment, Hood's 5 regiments of the Texas Brigade step off to begin the coup-de-grace blow of the battle. As the Texans feel their way forward, they make contact with skirmishers of the 10th New York, nicknamed the National Zouaves. The Confederates are moving fast. The New Yorkers give the rebels a single volley before darting off for the rear, where they gather in front of the 500 men of Duryea's Zouaves, the 5th New York. Hood's men are snapping at their heels. The bulk of the 10th New York, which is disordered and demoralized following its short but bloody fight, flees the field. As they do so, the Zouaves of the 5th New York take the full wrath of Hood's assault. His troops have succeeded in quickly working around the base of the hill and opening a murderous crossfire that fells scores of Federals in moments. The field is shrouded with a choking cloud of smoke, and the New Yorkers can barely make out the enemy that seems to surround them. The Union troops cannot escape the Confederates' overwhelming fire. In just minutes, what is left of the shattered regiment breaks apart. The 5th New York, a proud unit that would produce 8 generals from its ranks, suffers more men killed in 10 minutes than any other regiment will lose in a single battle during the entire Civil War. A witness compares the aftermath of this fight to a posy garden, referring to the corpses of the 5th New York in their gaudy Zouave uniforms. Hood's men, smelling blood, swarm across the hillside in close pursuit. In the mad dash for safety, dozens more are shot. When the 5th New York rallies on Chinn Ridge, it numbers just 60 men. During the confusion of the fighting, not everyone has received orders to fall back. Still unlimbered at their original position, the 6 guns of Lieutenant Hazlett's Battery D, 5th U.S. Artillery, are defiantly banging away at Hood's troops. Seeing that the battery is about to be overrun, Private James Webb, in one of the war's most memorable acts of individual valor, takes off at the run to warn Hazlett's gunners. Braving a gauntlet of enemy fire, Webb miraculously reaches the battery and informs Hazlitt that he is without infantry support. The artillery officer then leads his battery off at the walk. As the front line of Federal troops collapses, the ugly reality of the impending disaster dawns on McDowell. The obvious place to make a stand is Chinn Ridge, an imposing rise that, if manned in force, can contest a Confederate steamroller on its path toward Henry House Hill. But before Union defenses can be patched together, McDowell has to make a desperate play for time. He frantically follows Reynolds' division, which are the very troops that he had so recently ordered north of the Warrenton Turnpike. He directs Colonel Martin D. Hardin's 3rd Brigade, composed of 4 regiments, back to the fight. Hardin's troops, which are supported by Captain Mark Kern's Battery G, 1st Pennsylvania Light Artillery, rush into a position on a small hill to the west of Chinn Ridge. When the Pennsylvanians form up in 2 lines on the summit of the hill, the Texas Brigade is fast approaching. Captain Kern's guns bang away at the Confederates, who briefly stall on the banks of Young's Branch. The standoff is momentary. Without orders, some of the Confederates, electrified by the fight, spontaneously dash up the hill. With Confederates lapping around his flanks, Hardin rushes forward his 2nd line of infantry, but the weight of numbers tells. Collapsing under the pressure of the rebel onslaught, Hardin's infantry breaks for the rear. Kern's gunners do not last much longer. Streaming for safety of Chinn Ridge, the artillerists abandon their guns and their captain. Captain Kern is made of stern material. Left alone on the field, he single-handedly attempts to man the 6 guns of his battery. Some of the Confederates begin shouting for their comrades to hold their fire, for the Yankee artilleryman is far too brave to kill. But when Kern readies to fire a load of canister, chivalric sentiments give way to sheer survival, and he's shot down. With the position cleared of Federals, Hood sets his sights on the commanding heights of Chinn Ridge. The ridge is only 300 yards away beyond a steep ravine, but a fresh brigade of Federals, as well as the frowning guns of an enemy battery, is clearly visible along the summit. Wasting little time, Hood orders his men forward, first seeking cover in the ravine, and then angling to the right for a belt of timber that could help shield his troops from Federal artillery. During the confusion of the advance, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Carter's 4th Texas falls back to Young's Branch. This leaves Hood's Texas Brigade with just 3 regiments to assault the daunting ridge. Fortunately, he will have help. His immediate supporting infantry brigade, the South Carolinians under Evans, arrives in front of Chinn Ridge but edges ever farther to the right. Lashed by massed Federal batteries on Dogan's Ridge to the north, the South Carolinians continue the mad push toward the right until Evan loses tactical control of his brigade. His regiments will go into action piecemeal. Atop Chinn Ridge, Colonel Nathaniel McLean's 2nd Brigade of 1,200 Ohioans and Robert Schink's division anxiously await the Confederate assault. For his actions slowing the Confederate advance on August 30th, McClellan will be promoted to Brigadier General the following month. From the front, McClellan is assailed by the 17th and 18th South Carolina regiments of Evans' brigade. The Confederates come on gamely but are badly mauled in their ascent of the ridge. Artillery fire, paired with McClellan's musketry, tears great gaps in the ranks of the Palmetto Staters. In the intense fighting that unfolds on the ridge, Colonels John Means and James Gadbury of the 17th and 18th South Carolina respectively are slain. When Evans' attack sputters, Colonel Jerome B. Robertson's 5th Texas Infantry Regiment enters the action. The Texans try to swing around McLean's flank but fail to dislodge them. McLean's brigade holds its ground. McLean catches sight of a massive body of troops headed for his left. The colonel hopes the troops are Union reinforcements. Unfortunately for the Yankees on Chinn Ridge, there are 4 brigades of James Kemper's division. Colonel Montgomery Corse, leading Kemper's brigade, senses the Federals' vulnerability. His troops sweep north along the ridge. The Buckeyes, who are deployed behind a fence, wait until the Confederates are within 50 yards, and then they rise up and unleash a terrific volley. The Virginians reel under the heavy blow. The volley struck the long line like an electric shock, wrote Private Alexander Hunter of the 17th Virginia. But the officers surge ahead cheering on the men. The left of our brigade struck the enemy's right and doubled it up. In a moment, the blue line quivered and went to pieces. Time is running out for McLean's stubborn troops. A renewed Confederate push, which is supported by artillery, ultimately breaks the Ohioans' line. The Confederates have shot down 400 of the Buckeyes in just 30 minutes. Nevertheless, McClellan buys time for another Union line to be formed behind him. As the survivors flee for the rear, reinforcements arrive on the scene in the form of Brigadier General Zealous B. Tower's 2nd Brigade of Ricketts Division, as well as 5 guns from Captain George Lepian's 5th Maine Battery. Tower hastily deploys his 4 regiments across Chinn Ridge, where they come under heavy attack by the advancing rebels. Corse's brigade, augmented by portions of Hood's and Evans' brigades, laps around both of Tower's flanks. The Confederate crossfire shreds Tower's 2nd Brigade. The 88th Pennsylvania on Tower's left breaks under the pressure, its men streaming to the rear in confusion. As Tower's position crumbles, Colonel Frederick Skinner of the 1st Virginia and Kemper's Brigade spurs his mount ahead of his men. He thunders into the midst of the Maine artillerymen. When one of the Federals attempts to fire a gun, Skinner swings his sword, a ponderous old French dragoon saber, in a wide arc that severs the Yankee's head. Skinner cuts down another gunner, but is assailed by a third who discharges his pistol into Skinner's face. The shot narrowly misses killing him, slicing off a bit of his earlobe. Although Skinner cuts the man down, he's shot in the arm and ribcage. Both sides funnel more men into the fight, but the Federals, caught in the vicious vice of a massive Confederate assault and entirely outflanked, get the worst of it. A frantic McDowell orders 2 more brigades onto Chinn Ridge, where Kemper's troops overwhelm them. The Federals fight bravely but suffer for it. "Our boys drop like 10 pins," wrote Private George Payne of the 13th Massachusetts. He recalled seeing a soldier drop to the ground in front of him. "I heard the bullets clug into his body. It seemed half a dozen struck him. I shall never forget the look on his face as he turned over and died," recalled Payne. During the fight, Colonel Fletcher Webster's 12th Massachusetts is badly beaten back, and Webster is left mortally wounded on the field. With the Confederates surging past him in their continuous attack, Sergeant Lovewell Hutchinson of the 8th Virginia and Eppa Hunton's brigade stops briefly to give the dying colonel some water. Webster asks for Hutchinson to take his wallet, containing a note for his wife he had written that morning, and deliver the wallet to her when the war finally ends if Hutchinson survives. Sergeant Hutchinson agrees to the dying man's last request, and manages to live through the war to deliver his wallet to his widowed wife in Massachusetts. The momentum is clearly with the Confederates. At 6 p.m., an hour before dark, Longstreet's Confederates pry loose the last of the Federal defenders on Chinn Ridge. In 90 minutes of furious fighting, the Confederates have overwhelmed the troops directed by McDowell to hold Chinn Ridge. But the Federals' costly defense of the ridge has furnished Pope with precious time which to bolster the defenses of Henry House Hill. If his troops can fight a successful rearguard action on Henry Hill, he will be able to hold the stone bridge over Bull Run long enough for his troops across to safety. Oddly enough, the troops that Pope orders to Henry House Hill are the 2 remaining brigades of John Reynolds' Pennsylvania Reserves Division. These are the same troops whose redeployment from the left flank, ordered by McDowell, had led to disaster. As Reynolds' men form up on the crest of Henry Hill, Brigadier General Robert Milroy's Independent Brigade forms on their left, and Lieutenant Colonel William Chapman's crack brigade of U.S. regulars form on Milroy's left. The strong Union line is supported by multiple artillery batteries. Lee and Longstreet give them little time to prepare. Jackson's left wing begins a tardy push against the Federal right. About the same time, David R. Jones' 3 brigades of Georgians and South Carolinians from Longstreet's right wing form up to assault the Union troops on Henry Hill. Jones' troops surge up the slope of Henry House Hill into the teeth of the Union musketry and artillery. Charging to within 500 yards of the Union line, the Georgians and South Carolinians seek cover and return fire. The Federals, who are fully aware that the fate of the battle hinges on the possession of Henry Hill, firmly stand their ground. The Confederates continue feeding more troops into the assault on Henry House Hill. Longstreet had placed Richard H. Anderson's division behind his other 4 divisions so Anderson's troops might deliver the coup-de-grace to the rounded Federal army. Anderson's 3 brigades are led by Brigadiers Lewis Armistead, William Mahone, and Ambrose Wright. These troops move into position for a fresh assault. Mahone's 4 regiments of Virginians overlap Chapman's flank. A savage firefight unfolds on the extreme Union left between the regulars and the fresh rebel troops. The regulars pay horribly for their stand. With his ranks rapidly thinning, Chapman is forced to withdraw his remaining troops. Moving up to relieve them is Lieutenant Colonel Robert C. Buchanan's 1st Brigade of U.S. Regulars. In the center of the Henry Hill line, Milroy breaks down. He babbles incomprehensibly for reinforcements. When the apoplectic brigadier attempts to commandeer two of Buchanan's regiments, the defiant colonel tells him to go away. Such steady nerves begin to turn the tide of the battle. Pope succeeds in funneling further reinforcements toward Henry House Hill, and Anderson's division, exhausted after its hurried march to the hill, fails to press the attack. As dusk falls, the last-ditch Union line on Henry Hill begins to stabilize. Sporadic fighting will continue into the darkness, but the Federal Army of Virginia, though badly mauled by Longstreet's massive attack, has narrowly escaped destruction. Pope issues orders for a retreat across the Stone Bridge over Bull Run to Centerville, where the exhausted Union troops immediately entrench. With the battle coming to its end, and the Federals on the retreat, Lee senses an opportunity to strike Pope's route of retreat across the Stone Bridge and administer the fatal blow to the already battered army. General Lee calls in Jeb Stuart to administer this killing maneuver. Promptly, Brigadier General Beverly H. Robertson's brigade, along with Colonel Thomas L. Rosser's 5th Virginia Cavalry Regiment, are ordered forward. In the hands of these Confederate commanders lay the chance to envelop and destroy the entire Union army. Having received his orders, Beverly Robertson heads his brigade for Lewis Ford, south of the Union Army's line of retreat. Approaching the ford, Robertson observes a small squadron of Federal cavalry and orders Colonel Thomas T. Mumford's 2nd Virginia Cavalry to charge them. Mumford leads his regiment in a race for the enemy and scatters them. However, lurking behind the Federal squadron is Brigadier General John Buford's Cavalry Brigade. Recognizing each other, the two mounted forces charge one another. Numerically superior, the Federal cavalry soon has the advantage. Abruptly, the Confederates are reinforced by the rest of Robertson's brigade, and the tide of battle changes. Although lasting only a few minutes, the cavalry action at Lewis Ford is a vicious fight. Confederates and Federals go toe-to-toe armed with only sabers and pistols. Horses and riders are thrown together. One participant stated that the shooting and running, cursing and cutting that followed cannot be understood except by an eyewitness. Caught in this melee, Confederate Colonel Mumford is dismounted and severely slashed across his back. Union Colonel Thornton F. Broadhead, in command of the 1st Michigan Cavalry, is shot point blank after refusing to surrender, becoming mortally wounded. Even Brigadier General Buford is wounded in the knee while leading the Union Cavalry. In a violent, costly, and desperate battle, the Federals achieve much from the sacrifices made at Lewis Ford. Union forces flee toward the retreating army. Having pursued, the Confederate cavalrymen soon find themselves behind the Federal army, with darkness fast approaching, and so little cavalry skirmish at Lewis Ford ends. Darkness on Saturday, August 30th marks the end of the 3-day Second Battle of Bull Run, or Battle of Second Manassas. The Union Army has been soundly defeated but is able to retreat in good order. Pope is able to save himself from total disgrace, but has taken the blood of brave men to do so. The human cost of the fierce fighting is simply staggering. The Union has lost 14,462 men in total during the 3-day battle, with 1,747 killed, 8,452 wounded, and 4,263 captured or missing. The Confederates have lost half that number in total casualties, at 7,298, 1,096 men killed, and 6,202 wounded. The results of the Union defeat at Second Manassas, the second defeat on the same battlefield in just over a year, are equally devastating to the Northern War efforts. John Pope, not surprisingly, will be edged out of his command on September 2nd. An exultant George McClellan resumes command of the reunited Army of the Potomac. Pope's inept leadership has set the stage for a Confederate invasion of the North. Officials of the Lincoln administration voiced their outrage at the second debacle suffered by the Union Army on the plains of Manassas. Never before was there such a great army, composed of truly excellent materials, and yet so poorly commanded, said Attorney General Edward Bates. One rebel offers his own homespun assessment. "We whipped the Yankees worse this time than they ever was whipped before," said Jefferson Wilson of the 16th Mississippi. One more engagement will be fought at Chantilly and Ox Hill on September 1st before the Northern Virginia campaign comes to its full conclusion. By then, General Robert E. Lee will begin setting in motion his plans to invade the North through the state of Maryland. This, in turn, will lead to the bloodiest single day in American history, outside of the little farming community of Sharpsburg, Maryland, along a creek known as the Antietam.